Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Munib. I'm a second year student at the MSW program here at NYU. Intern currently at the LGBT Center, and I co-lead the private practice student club, which is the LGBTQ club here in NYU. So we're here to speak with social workers who do work with LGBT populations, and the purpose really is to allow social work students to explore the idea of working with LGBTQ populations in a wide range of practice areas. So without further ado, if you can introduce yourselves and where you work, who you are, where you work.
Sure. Hi everybody, my name is Raad. I am a social worker at Callen-Lorde Community Health Center. We provide services to LGBT individuals, and our mission really is to provide comprehensive and quality health care regardless of the ability to pay. I work in the Article 31 mental health clinic doing individual and group psychotherapy. I co-lead a series of DBT groups that have just been launched at the clinic, and I graduated in 2012. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Roaslyn, and I'm a family therapist at SEO Family Services in the LGBTQ program, where we work with adolescents and their families. SEO, in my program, we have residential foster care as well as the close to home program. I don't know if you've heard about that. That's where the juvenile offenders, instead of serving time in jail, they are in a group environment where they do everything as a group. And also our agency had gotten a grant from DYCD, which is the Department of Youth and Community Development, to launch a program to work with LGBTQ youth and their families around acceptance. So all that to say that I do family therapy in those regards.
I'm Laura Jacobs. Let's see, by day I guess I'm a not so mild-mannered psychotherapist. I have a couple positions. One of them in New Jersey is with the Institute for Personal Growth, where I see primarily LGBTQ clients. About half my population is trans at that position. I do a trans adolescent support group. And I also work with other forms of sexual minority at that position, which are things like people involved in BDSM and fetish and non-monogamous relationships, sex workers, things like that. So I focus on the LGBTQ and other forms of alternate lifestyle communities. By night, I do a lot of activism and other projects of that sort. I'm on the board of directors of Callen-Lorde, which is the largest LGBTQ health center, we think, in the nation. I'm on several advisory boards of Callen-Lorde. I'm on the board of directors for an upcoming book project, which is going to be called Trans Bodies, Trans Selves. It's based on the women's book, Our Bodies, Ourselves. It's coming out in the spring. We're going to do a national outreach project. We're actually in the process of starting to implement a national outreach project. Go to the Indiegogo page. There's we're raising money. And I'm also on the board of the Philly Trans Health Conference. I do things like that. I also do writing and public speaking around LGBT, especially transgender, and other alternate lifestyle issues. Yes, very busy.
So I'm Darryl Mitteldorf. I actually graduated from here 22 years ago. I hope I'm not the oldest in the room, but I'm certainly the most ancient, I guess. I've been, after graduation, I worked in real estate development, and then I worked for a state psychiatric hospital. And then I transferred to Europe, where I looked into a refugee resettlement organization and spent many years working in Africa and helping underserved refugees resettle in host countries. In 1997, I returned to the United States. My dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer, came back to support him. And finding myself unemployed and a very significant niche in our community, underserved, I've created what's become a multinational organization that I Rare Cancer Support. It's a national gay men's cancer survivor organization. And in 2005, I'm the founder and current executive director of the National LGBT Cancer Project. And keeping the books, we also have a book coming out this spring, the LGBT Cancer Survivors Handbook. So you could buy 2 books now.
So welcome everybody. So I'm going to ask a series of questions, and anybody who wants to can just answer. And then if we have some time, we'll have some questions for the audience, for the audience member. So I guess my first question is, did you know what career you wanted to pursue before you entered the school of social work?
So by that, you're asking, social work.
Did you know that you want to work specifically with LGBTQ populations? That's something that you knew you wanted to do before you entered the school?
I mean, my simple answer is not at all. I didn't identify our community as a population that specifically yearned to either be an advocate or a participant in care for. But certainly found myself navigated there just by circumstance and made a desire.
For me, it was a bit different. I mean, I did know I wanted to work with the LGBT population from the get-go. Through my own experiences of trying to navigate the healthcare system, the mental health system, even years ago as a client, found just how little compassionate, knowledgeable care was out there. And it really, I just felt a desire to work with this population. This is my community. I felt a desire to give back to my community. And just like so many marginalized communities, there's such a need. And people in my life seem to think that this was a good career path, so.
My answer to pretty much starts the same as Darryl's. No. I just knew I wanted to help people. And then my path got started working with ACS, Children's Services. And an opportunity came up. I heard a lot about the LGBTQ program that they have there, there's a work and advocacy they were doing, and then an opportunity came up with a position as a caseworker to work with LGBTQ youth. And I was already volunteering at a grassroots organization, Identity House, with adults. So I just felt there was an opportunity to give back and work with youth, that I enjoyed it. So that's really
Sort of on the same train as Laura here. I really just always used to say I had 2 passions: the creative arts, especially music and theater, and social justice. And in looking into sort of a career path of you that can combine really the 2, I felt that social work really allowed to foster that creativity in addition to being a profession so rooted in advocating for disenfranchised populations and oppressed individuals.
Thank you. What was it that you did during your MSW, or was there anything that you did during your MSW program that helped you in your career now? Do you have any ideas for our audience here, things that they can do, maybe pursue that will help them?
Take courses in other schools. I mean, there's, I don't know if the combined degree thing still exists, where you get a master's of public administration as well as a master's of social work. Yeah, I mean, I did that. That was brilliant. I mean, that gave me a really strong background for the kind of administrative work that I'm doing now, but also the idea of having a broader range of skills and reading in your background gives me a better conversation with people that I've worked with in all aspects of social work. I mean, one of the big take-homes for any student, that comes to my office is just read everything that's put in front of you, because you're never going to want to do it after graduation. I mean, now's the time to just force feed yourself journal articles and things. So to be able to have a broader range, taking advantage of the really great university that NYU has become, is really a rare opportunity and something we want to be existed in.
Building on that, I think the more that you bring, the more that you have within you, the more that you bring to yourself, the more that you have developed yourself, the more you bring to your work with clients, the more you can experience, the greater range of experiences you're drawing on when you're working with your clients. So throw yourself into everything you can find, not just at NYU, but in life in general. Cultural things. I mean, New York is one of the cultural centers of the world. Visit museums, go to lectures, see everything you can see. Obviously, try and find internships and placements that help where you want to go. Though I would also suggest finding ones that seem very tangential. Don't, because you will gain things there as well. I kind of wish, well, at the risk of biting the hand that feeds me, since this is an NYU panel, I had kind of wished that there was more LGBTQ training at NYU while I was here. At least when I was here, there was very little. But, this is New York, so there's plenty of other opportunities. I guess experience as much as you can.
I think I was fortunate enough to come into school when they started launching the LGBT flow, and that's still going on here at the school. Great. And so really sort of, I think, focused learning opportunities to be able to kind of hone the trajectory into your area of interest around LGBT issues, which I found very beneficial, because I think there's such a depth and breadth of knowledge within this profession. So I definitely agree there needs to be sort of an expansion and focus at the same time. I find that. And in addition to that, I think fostering the individual talents that we all bring as individuals to our work. I think, Laura, you mentioned prior that so many social workers have prior lives and prior professions. And I think it's so important to really infuse the work that we do in this profession with our various life experiences.
Like you, I was a musician before this, and I worked in theater and the arts in many ways. And I still find myself drawing on that even when I'm sitting with a client, whether they're involved in the arts or not. I'm still thinking in terms of how I'm bringing threads of conversation together, much like I might construct a piece of music. So, I think we draw on our past experience and it only makes us stronger as social workers.
Well, I'm going to duplicate everything that Bob said, in that it's about drawing on your experience, yourself, your drive, but also what you can get into in the community. Like I said, when I first started to get my degree, which is a second career, I was also volunteering at an LGBTQ organization, which gave me a ton of knowledge, workshops, anything out there around it, just to try to soak it up. I know time is tight, but we're all doing it. So it's like, go out and experience as much as possible. And then the opportunity, a lot of agencies are starting to do more work with LGBTQ, so there's big opportunities there.
Volunteer for anything that seems even remotely close to what you might want to do, because you never know what that's going to be.
So what is it that you love the most about your work?
The hours in bed.
Well, innovation. I mean, one of the things, social work these days is so open to innovation. I mean, it's no longer like working in an agency, doing like a whole house kind of action. I mean, between internet and the ability to travel and to leverage financial and labor resources all over the world, to outsource and to bring in ideas and to crowdsource ideas. I mean, you have the opportunity to do anything you could possibly imagine. I mean, the LGBT Cancer Project and male care started from that sort of proposition that there were niches to be filled with good services and structures to surround those services. These days, now I really age myself, but I mean, these days, young people have the ability, anyone really has the ability to do anything. The cost of doing an agency is quite minimal now when you have internet and can create, volunteer services for people living, 10 time zones away. And you have to think really as broadly as you can, and then you build in a sense of fun and gratification from it, to know that, like, you're not only helping people, but you're helping people in ways that didn't exist prior to your thinking of them. And that's really a good sense of gratification. You know, I mean, the short hours and the high pay are one part of social work. You know, and of course, it's the crappiest paying job in the world. So you have to find motivation, and, that will last much longer than the first few years after graduation. I mean, it's a career that will last a lifetime. And, it's not going to be a mansion. It's going to be something that lets you go to sleep at night and have a really good sleep, knowing you did a good piece of work that helped somebody or helped many hundreds or thousands of people.
Sorry, the question got very involved.
What is it that you love the most about your work?
Being able to help. Being able to help people help themselves. And I think that's a big piece in this work. We want to get out and do a lot of surveys of a fresh social worker around the world. It's like, I want to help. That's great, but as I've learned, it was about really finding those tools, learning about those tools to give to those folks to help themselves. And I love working with the families because certainly child welfare is long forgotten about the family component, but as in doing this work, really come to learn that even though these are important, they're important as their families are. So I enjoy tying those two things together. That's really, lets me speak at night. Sometimes not, but.
I have to say, absolutely, I love the clinical work. What sort of drew me to NYU was to be able to, hone your skills as a clinician working in the field. But I also would like to say that one of my favorite parts about the work that I do is the opportunity to try to integrate sort of the micro, meso, and macro sort of approaches in the work to really know what policies are out there that affect LGBT individuals, right? What the law says. What, in addition to all the dynamic and the behavioral work that we do with our clients every day, in addition to what's happening, what are the agencies out there, right? How do we connect within our city, within our country, globally, etc. So I sort of love the integration of sort of all those systems.
I guess my answer sort of combines what everybody else says and puts my own spin on it. I mean, of course, I was drawn to do clinical work. That's why I got into it. I love doing clinical work. I love sitting there with clients, helping them explore their identities. I love that I'm helping people grow in so many ways. I love that I'm doing so many innovative things and working with so many organizations. And, of course, I love helping the others, but I'm going to give the selfish part of that answer, which is that I love how much I get to do. All the things I listed that I am involved with before all come about because of my social work background, because of my knowledge of clinical work, but also of policy, of activism and whatnot. And all those projects that I do are all so very enriching to my personal life. They make me feel good about myself. And yes, I love helping clients and I love having them grow. But there's parts of this that are, about self-validation, about, selfishness. And I have to say, it makes me feel good to be able to do all these diverse projects that all come about through my social work education and background. And the other part of it is that as much as I love helping my clients, I get to experience so much with them that it informs my own sense of self, my own experience. It helps me develop my own sense of life and meaning. So, as much as I echo the giving to others, there's also parts of this that's very rewarding about it.
It's the kind of work that helps you grow, continue to grow as well throughout your career. What professional organizations or institutes have you personally joined, and how have they helped you with your practice?
Well, I'm going to plug an ISW. I think every social worker should explore membership. As a student, actually, I had the opportunity to work with the New York City chapter to do membership recruitment at NYU. I'm the new one. All right. Okay. Is Harriet still there?
Harriet?
Okay.
No.
Well, I mean, it's a great organization, right? I think the advocacy within our profession is such an important part of the work that we do as well, right? To be a support system, to know where resources are, to talk about things like loan forgiveness. So that's my point.
Anything you can do about one thing.
And I should,
Oh, sorry.
no, no.
Well, I joined, sorry, I shouldn't say. I've also joined the organization. There's just a lot of information there for whatever, you read on different chapters. I haven't joined one in particular, but it's kind of keep my eye out, it's not on the page, and, it's just very resourceful for information.
Well, I'm part of NASW as well. But I'm also part of a lot of things that have more specifically to do with the kind of work that I do. I haven't attended classes at any of the institutes, but I'm part of WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. I'm part of several organizations around sexuality in different forms. So things like that. I'm part of the Philly Trans Health Conference. A lot of those organizations which really provide support. There's an LGBT, or there used to be, I don't know if it's still around, LGBT NASW group, which used to have meetings here in New York. I don't know that they're still meeting at all.
There still is.
There still is?
Yeah, I haven't joined yet.
Okay.
It's good.
I used to go to some of their meetings a number of years back, which I enjoyed, and then I just got so swamped with everything else. But that's another great place. All these are good places to get information and support.
Look at what you're interested in too. I mean, my thing is oncology and cancer. So I'm a member of probably half a dozen different organizations that have membership directories online that gives me the opportunity to connect with my colleagues. I mean, the most obvious one is the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association. There's the American Society of Clinical Oncology, the European Medical Society of Oncology, and on and on and on. When I was doing refugee resettlement, there were organizations within the United Nations, within the International Rescue Committee, within the European World for Refugee Resettlement. The point is, look to your niche. Don't just stay in this looking to connect with other social workers. There's a practical aspect. And LinkedIn. LinkedIn didn't exist until, 3-4 years ago or whatever. I paid the extra $100 for the ability to send direct emails, and I find that invaluable. Whether it actually has a monetary value, but it certainly has a professional value and a good feeling value. I meet people in that way. Meetups are very good. But the idea that connecting with people who are not social workers, there's an ugly truth that social workers will compete with each other, just like in any profession. Psychologists will compete with other psychologists. Gas station attendants will compete with other gas stations. It just works out that way, whether you like it or not. But within our field, there are psychologists, there are advocacy people, there are activists, there are community organizers, there are people that won't feel competitive with us because they don't share our MSWs, etc. And those are brilliant connections. And really, you make great friends and lifelong friends out of it. I tried for a brief while to create like a salon kind of thing. And, that petered out after a year. But the idea of it has grown into, for me, a virtual version of it. Mainly from contacts that I've met on LinkedIn. So leverage all those. Again, it's like a different world now than when I started out. And, the economies of meeting people and sharing ideas online are just brilliant. And it would be insane not to take advantage of those and to sort of, pipe yourself into just the social world. And that's it, joining NASW. At least you get liability insurance.
And what are the most surprising things, both good and bad, so to speak, about your work? What you do about your agency?
So the most
What are the most surprising
surprises.
things?
There's surprises in every part of life. You know, what makes it a surprise is you didn't anticipate it. You know, within social work for me, that I'm working in our community is a surprise, you know, as I look back over the last 21 years. No way that I think I would be doing that, you know. On the other hand, the unsurprising thing that when I'm head of a respected and novel organization, you know, I mean, that was really what I wanted to do. I guess sort of rhymes with what Laura was saying. You know, the sense of, you know, self-gratification, ego development, and just sort of feeling like, you know, yeah, you've accomplished something. You know, you broke the tape at the end of the race or something. That's worthy. There's no shame in feeling like you want to be the best at something, you know, because our clients deserve that. You know, I mean, you know, the sense that, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we're sitting in this room and having gone to this school, you know, partially to help ourselves have a career, but also to help people who don't have the capacity or ability to attend this school. You know, and they deserve the best, no matter who or where they are, whether they're in our community or out. You know, so for us to be the best is a way to share perfection and the capacity to help. You know, that's something to do.
For me, the fact that I'm even here is a surprise, a good surprise to me, because this is my second career. And I've like met goals in terms of my actual work. The learning of the human condition, how that's just changed my whole perspective and how I view others outside of myself. The bad part is probably when I have friends talking very not politically correct or not observant of things, or they're very critical. And I'm just so in tune to those conditions that it's difficult for me to not shed that light. Because it just becomes so important that, you know, we have youth and we know what's going on at home, but then there's circumstances around that home. It's not just what you're looking at. It's, you know, if something's happening with the kid, pull them out. Like when I worked at ACS, my caseworkers, the supervisors, their motto was, when in doubt, pull them out. Thankfully, I had not an administrator for a supervisor, but a social worker for a supervisor. And we put all kinds of stopgaps in place to keep that youth at home. So really learning about the human condition is much more than what we look at. You have to want to look at what's going on underneath and try to do the work to help, you know, smooth that out or make it different without wrecking a family. And that's really what, you know, big.
You know, I'm fortunate enough in Callen-Lorde to do 1 day a week working with young adults and adolescents in their HOT program, the adolescent program there. And I will say, I don't know if it's really a surprise, but it's really just an element of kind of an acknowledgement of the strength and resilience that so often we talk about in social work school as the core of the work that we do with our clients. And that's really real. That I am so impressed at some of these young individuals who have so much resilience in their lives. And I think that's been one of the most rewarding things, at least from a clinical perspective.
Well, the most surprising thing, I guess, again, I'm going to probably be echoing what everybody else says. I'm going to start off with the negative, so I can maybe go to the positive. The one negative surprising thing, and it probably shouldn't be that much of a surprise, is that some of the social work, social service organizations that I work with don't always provide the support that you need, the resources that you need, and that can make it very difficult, even within an organization that is committed to social services. I will say that's a minority of the organizations that I work with. It's certainly, I don't think, the case in Callen-Lorde, and Callen-Lorde really tries to do everything we can. But, you know, I've worked other places too, and some of them are less supportive. But on the positive side, I've had a couple things. Adolescence and seeing the resilience and strength in adolescence is sometimes very surprising. I didn't really want to work with adolescents. I don't know, something about it just made me feel like, you know, let the, you know, you people who want to specialize in that, go ahead, knock yourself out. I don't know about anything. But A couple situations sort of forced me into it, working with a couple clients that nobody else knew how to work with, or wanting to start a support group for trans adolescents. And over time, I have really started to enjoy it, which I guess is a surprising thing about myself. But also echoing something you said, I mean, it's surprising to me that I've been able to do so much that I have, and even to take on positions like being on the board of directors of the largest LGBTQ health center in the nation, and really be influencing healthcare for thousands of people, and being on the board of a national trans conference, and again, being able to influence large numbers of people. I guess I find it really surprising and enriching, rewarding, that I'm able to do so many wonderful things and really have such influence. So I hope I have good things to influence people with.
So where do you yourselves go for advice or for peer consultation, and where do you find those resources?
Well, I have a funny story on that. The guy who was mentored me just got arrested for stealing $5 million. I was head of a Jewish poverty organization, and he's literally in handcuffs 3 weeks ago, Tuesday. Part of that story, I guess, the moral of that is, buyer beware when it comes to advice. You never know who, the people you're getting it. For somebody to give advice, they have some sort of motivation behind that desire to give advice. What is that motivation? How did you meet them to begin with? So where do I get advice from? I don't know. I'm just ashamed.
And not just advice, but also, if you feel that you need to consult with anyone.
But here's the thing. It is competitive for. The three of us are in the healthcare thing. I'm just learning about your age. None of us can here, but within my little patch of the world, and within the healthcare, there's competition between Callen-Lorde and counterparts. There's competition between the Cancer Project and our counterparts. We're all begging at the same trough for money. We're all sort of trying to be, get the best researchers to be on our team. For me, probably historically looking outside of my patch of the woods has been the most helpful. And also just paying attention to advice. There was something on a TV show called Homeland the other night that one of the characters said that resonated so well that I was able to actually bring it up at a staff meeting, and we actually used that kind of strategy. The world is filled with free advice, whether it's from television or books or just people that bump into on the subway. You don't need a particular formal network. That said, if you got one, be grateful and hope that he or she doesn't go to prison.
Well, how far does his mentorship have you go?
But 15 years. Since I started to use look in the New York Times.
You don't still see him.
Right, that's what I was phone consultations.
Yeah, right. Well, I think my belt at the door.
I think that's a really sort of important point to bring out, because yes, there is competition and there's pressure, right? Both on the individual level and on the systematic level, whether it's within agencies or within larger systems. And I think for those individuals and folks who want to go into clinical work especially, we can really be prone to sort of the vicarious trauma that we experience in our work with, our clients. And it's so important. I'm sure you guys talk about it all the time. Self-care, 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 right? Eat, make sure you go to the gym, etc. But that is so crucial that I have found in the work that it is important to find like-minded individuals who won't be taking $5 billion of money I don't have, but individuals who you find can be advocates for you as well. In the same way we are advocates for so many of the folks that we work with.
Well, I was thinking about the question, thinking about myself, my own supervision or advice. And I don't say so much that I get advice, but certainly as we're the LGBTQ program in the city. I'm going to mention this agency's name anyway, because I can't think of another way around it, but Green Chimneys, they have a residential program and have since closed. So as a result, we've opened up 2 new houses for some of those youth. So a lot of people come to us because of the work that we've been doing. And also we seek outside information on different ways to work with youth. Like there's something called the Missouri approach. The Google ad come up. Also FFT therapy, which I'm doing that now. So I have supervision, which FFT functional family therapy. And so I have supervision with that, and I can pick up the phone and call her if I need. My supervisor, she's a great resource for a lot of this stuff, and also my peers, as much as they're caseworkers, they are also a lot of them MSW students. So there's a lot of advice floating around inside, and as far as outside, I don't know where we go. We look to source and establish resources for that. That's the best question.
I mean, some of the ones are the obvious ones, and I guess you've all touched on it. Family, friends, hobbies, the professional associations, and those are the real obvious places to get support. Some of the people in my network are people who are not doing this kind of work at all. One of my best friends used to be a social worker and is not anymore, and she's a great person to sort of speak with. Some of the people I'm involved with through some of these organizations are doing somewhat similar work or whatnot. But I guess in some ways I find it really hard, especially since a lot of what I do is very niche. If I'm struggling with a client who is transgendered, involved in S&M, and has multiple partners and multiple relationships, there aren't too many places I can go for supervision without having to spend a half an hour explaining each one of those things and the ethics of that community and get the sort of proper and informed support that I might need. I have some people I can turn to for that, but it's harder, especially the further outside the norm you get. But that's especially why it's important, because you're dealing with these issues that are outside the norm. Your clients are going to be dealing with these issues. They need the support. They need you to be informed. They need you to be informed not just about their issues, but about what you're bringing to their issues, the countertransference, your own feelings about these things, whether or not you're involved in some of those lifestyles. You may have feelings about them. And so somebody who can help you see all that while still knowing enough about those communities is sometimes hard to find. But I guess that goes to what you're saying, which is look carefully and consider carefully who you're going to take on as a supervisor, as a friend, as a peer that you go to.
Okay, so one more question, and then we'll open the floor to all of you to ask questions. I guess along the same lines of advice, what are the main pieces of advice that you can give to students here, to us, who are graduating from your program and eventually want to work where you work?
Okay, I'm going to jump in first. In my head, it's kind of culminating what we've been saying. Explore the resources. Explore the resources and get involved in as many things as you can, and be true to yourself, which is going to help you take care of yourself, and that's a process. Because immediately, like I said before, you want to jump in, you want to do everything and help everybody. But as you learn, as you go through, there's ways that you can do that work and still take care of yourself.
Writing skills. Maybe once every 3 months or so, we have an opening for either an intern or an actual paid position. And whether it's Columbia or Hunter or here or anyone else, the dearth of skills and communication among our peers second thing, yeah, I mean, really, the take home around like how to get to where we are, start with very basic quality life skills. Show up on time, you know, keep your commitments. I can't tell you, we just fired a guy from NYU, a recent graduate of NYU, who basically decided to blow off 2 of his obligations. He had 2 assignments to lead 2 support groups. He didn't show up for either of them. You know, I mean, that kind of basic life skill quality. If you don't have it, this is the wrong business for you, because people depend on us showing up. People depend on us being able to communicate clearly. You know, I mean, I sometimes think I suffer from that. I mean, sometimes my presentations are somewhat rambling, but my writing, I struggle with and rewrite. And that's a skill, you know, a quality I hope in myself never dies. I mean, rewrite, you know, and read. Like we talked about before. I mean, now's the time to get your reading in, because when we graduate, you're not going to have that much, you know, the luxury of people telling you there's a journal article to read. That's sort of critical to your profession. You know, maybe you'll have the skills to Google it, but you really won't have the desire or motivation to, you know, or it would be rare if you do. Good for you for that. You know, but basic stuff like that. And I guess the other thing is be a very fun, enjoyable person. You know, I mean, clients need examples of happiness. You know, I mean, if you're not happy, you know, find a way to be happy. You know, as we were talking, you know, gym, movies, you know, travel. You know, there's a world outside of our clients' world that our clients want to be invested in as well and connected with, and they can do that through us. And then they get the motivation and the goal setting of like, yeah, life can be fun and better and happy, you know, because I know this person who's my social worker seems quite thrilled with being alive. And so those are the basic stuff. I mean, the rest of the stuff is we just pick it up as we go along. You know, listen, you know, to what's going on.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what you're talking about is modeling.
Yeah.
You know, just like you're looking to us for this kind of support, our clients or your clients are going to be looking to you to model having a rewarding career. Absolutely, the communication piece. When I get an email from an intern or a thing that's written by an intern or even an employee that I'm supervising that's poorly written, or even just poorly communicated verbally, you know, it gives an impression. A funny story similar to yours is, this was not my intern, but an intern at one of the agencies where I work lit up a cigarette in a session one day. And first of all, smoking is not even allowed in the building, let alone is it appropriate in a session. And then a week or 2 later, apparently he divulged that he had gone out to lunch. You know, he had sessions that afternoon. And while he was at lunch, he had a really nice glass of wine. And, you know, again, just the basic skills, he didn't see anything inappropriate with that. I don't think he lasted more than a few hours after that in the agency. He also was not a social work intern. He was master's in counseling or something like that. To be a little elitist about social work. But that aside, develop hobbies, you know, artistic pursuits, write for yourself, paint, do music, something like that that's enriching of your soul. And then just do what you can to try and create a rewarding career for yourself. From that, you know, a lot of other things will follow.
Just to sort of echo both of you, what I really heard in both of those, what you shared was balance and knowledge, right? A balance between our professional and personal selves, which is, of course, the component of self-care, and, of course, the knowledge and the skill sets that we need to foster. Specifically around LGBTQ communities, you know, we throw out that acronym so kind of nonchalantly. But I think it's very important, especially to work within LGBTQ communities, to really know the different sort of communities within that itself. Know about kink and fetish and various different sort of forms of identity expression. Know about intersectionality and the way race and gender, power and class really impact our experiences. So I think really beginning to sort of delve deep into something and begin to explore it.
So I guess we'll open the floor to
Hi, I'm Ricky. I'm sorry I was late. I was doing a home visit in the Lower East Side. I was like, I need to get here.
How do you?
But I made it. I missed the very beginning, unfortunately, and I didn't get to hear where you guys work. And I asked my two friends here, and neither of us. But do you have any suggestions? I've been working at an agency for people with developmental disabilities for the last 3 years, and because of my particular situation, I can't really work for money anywhere else but this agency. It's immigration reasons. I have a work visa. I'm not a U.S. citizen. But I would like to get my feet wet and gain some experience. And I was wondering if you had like any suggestions of where to go, what kinds of volunteering opportunities are available, so I can get a little bit of exposure, because I am interested in eventually working with specifically LGBT agencies.
So Google. It's easy to find things out, and you can start with very basic, like LGBTQ or LGB or, any information of that, and then the word agency or company or nonprofit, and then go to, just spend the hours it will take you to go to each website and drill down to see where there might be opportunities for volunteering or connecting with people that you may like. And most of those websites have email address contacts. So create a couple of paragraphs of boilerplate. I'm, Ricky, I do X, Y, or Z. I'm limited by my visa situation or whatever. You got anything for me? I got 20 hours a week in the morning, 4 every weekday morning, whatever it is. Whatever you got. It'll take hours, but and then maybe a few days, and then it'll take a few weeks to get replies, and then follow up by phone and just show up. But you're at the door. If you can't find a place to volunteer, outside of the restrictions you may have, of course, this is the best place for it.
I can give you a specific, but I don't think you were here when I mentioned in the beginning that, I did volunteer for Identity House. That's a community organization. You certainly Google them, and they have a website. You can ask, information.
I would reach out to, I guess I would start with the LGBT organizations, and there are 1,000 of them around New York City. Callen-Lorde, the LGBT Center, and a million others. But I wouldn't limit your search there, because a lot of non-LGBT specific organizations have LGBT programs, or for instance, a place like a nursing home, which might seem like it doesn't have any, that it might be too far outside. Nursing homes have LGBT residents, and often they're looking for somebody to come in and do LGBT talks, or LGBT support group, or something like that. So I wouldn't limit your search to organizations that are LGBTQ specific. I would try and think a little bit outside the box. I would also think a little bit about what niche you think you want to pursue, or what you can bring to it. You think you can run a group about, some substance abuse, or people of divergent ethnicities, or whatever, some sort of niche that you can bring to it, so that you can say, look, I'm not just looking for anything, I'm bringing something to this organization. And this may be something you haven't thought of, but I can help you guys by bringing this
So just a great site in general is audience.org, to look for various nonprofit organizations. But I will say that's such a great point about expanding your search, in addition to the LGBT networks. I think when we live in a shifting political and legal landscape where we realize that a certain kind of visibility for LGBT folks is much more present than it, say, was 10 years ago, I think that is much more reflected in the healthcare field in terms of wanting to provide more affirming services for LGBT folks. And, if you have the skill set and the training to begin to say, hey, this is what I can bring. And it's beginning to be something that folks are looking for more and more.
Yeah. And that's how you start to build a career. You know, it's often from those kinds of volunteer positions that you either find something else, you network to something else, or you develop a skill which you then take elsewhere.
Thank you very much.
You just mentioned the changing political landscape for LGBT issues, basically. Can you talk about how that's impacted your the work that you do, your practice, anything along those lines?
Well, I'm sorry. Well, I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit more about the grant we got from DYCD, Department of Community Development. That actually came from the fact that the LGBTQ youth population was rising and we wanted to do something about it. So the grant was for us to work with LGBTQ families on acceptance, runaway homeless youth, or youth that were on the verge of being put out. Certainly that's created a big role for us.
Just wondering, when you speak about LGBTQ families, you speak about LGBT youth
The youth and
their families.
So that's something that's been created out of the need that was recognized by New York State. I think it was Pataki that brought this whole thing about. In 2008, the study came in and the work had started. We got the grant in 2010. We had to develop a way of working with the families. But even before us, there was, it's called FAP, Family Acceptance Project. Started, it's probably been about 12 years ago, in Callen-Lorde in California, where they did a lot of work around LGBTQ and the families acceptance. So we piggybacked off of that. In return, then we got the FF2 therapy to work with families. So there's been a lot of work over the past 10, 15 years that's really starting to come to light. So all that's evidence-based stuff has brought us to this now.
And I just want to clarify in terms of what I said about the landscape and the changing in terms of LGBT issues. I mean, we all know that there's definitely a lot more visibility out there about LGBT issues on certain issues. Everybody sees marriage equality plastered over every national news organization. It gets better in terms of bullying and working with young adults is becoming sort of a national issue. But I want to be cognizant of the fact that these are sort of not necessarily inclusive of the diverse community in which we work in, right? Especially among young trans individuals of color, right? Young men and women from inner cities who identify as LGBTQ that may not necessarily feel the safety in being able to disclose their identity. So yes, there are certain changes that I think give us more freedom as professionals and clinicians to foster and show our skill set, to the various organizations out there. But there's still more to be done.
I think that's such an important point that when we see marriage equality or some of these other big headline issues getting a lot of press, that's really only representative of a small part of our community or a part of our community, and that so many people are not interested in marriage, don't have the financial resources, have much more pressing issues like need for healthcare, need for jobs, just need for transition services if they're transgender, or other things that are not covered by some of these headline issues. That's hugely important. So, I mean, I kind of think it's sort of a double-edged sword right now. I mean, it's easier in some ways and it's harder. I guess I was thinking a couple weeks ago about what was happening in Washington and the whole government shutdown and all that. And I was in my car one day and I was headed to a meeting, an LGBTQ meeting, and I was listening to NPR and they were talking about the infightings about the shutdown. I wanted to throw things and kick and scream and on one hand it seemed so abstract and distant and like DC is a couple hundred miles away and they're talking about these issues which to me didn't seem all that critical, but it may seem remote, but that affects funding that affects grants. The sequester is having a big impact on social service organizations. So when we think about the political climate, yes, there's a lot more awareness. And I have, let's say, trans adolescents who are getting support from their families in ways that I couldn't have dreamed of when I was their age. They're able to transition. They're getting support from their schools. They're getting support from their peers. They're getting health care. They're able to do legal things like change their names. For a 17-year-old trans kid, that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, even 5, 10 years ago. But at the same time, we have to look at, I think you said before, the macro, the micro, and the meta. And, some things are improving in some ways, but we also have to pay attention to the larger political climate, which is in some ways getting much more challenging. So those things in DC may seem remote, but they really do have an impact on the organizations that provide services to our communities. And frankly, sometimes the organizations where we have jobs. And I like to have food on my table, so I think so. Well,
the job's not over yet. We're in early days, medieval times, when it comes to getting where we want to be. And so when people say you have marriage equality, but have your laundry list of 20 items, just to surprise them that there's much more work to be done. The African American cancer survivor, the trans cancer survivor, the people from, if you drill down niche, it's still part of our community. It's still our policy issues, our advocacy issues. And that's really the take on this. Like, we're not anywhere near where we want to be. And 20 years ago, this wouldn't have happened at that point. I can't think of any outside of 2 women, perhaps, that were fully out, and none of our teachers were out. And I know my gay daughter sucks, but there were gay and lesbian teachers at that time. And here we are, but there's still so much work. Your work is beginning. And somebody thinks that it's over, it's fantasy. We've got 2 or 3 more generations to go through before we're where we want to be.
I think this gets back to something you were saying before, or at least what I think you were saying before, is about modeling. And part of our role is even just modeling being out as LGBT social workers, LGBTQ social workers, or doing the kind of work that we do, because that influences the political climate, that influences services, that influences our clients. So, for me, being out is important, and I think of it as a political act.
It is a political act, and you mentioned the BDSM.
Mm-hmm.
That certainly was. For what little I want to reveal about myself, it was a part of the life that I had early on. But if I mentioned that in this school, and those, in 1991, I have no friends. I have, and I don't know where my teachers would see me. It's just a different, and yet it's nowhere near where you would want. BDSM is like 50 Shades of Grey in 2013, and it's not. It's living your life, and other aspects of it.
There's far more to BDSM than 50 Shades.
Yeah.
Don't let that be your.
Yeah.
But even 5 years ago, I did a talk here at NYU, and I was talking about trans issues and S&M issues, and I was totally surprised because I thought everybody was going to want to talk about the S&M because it was, chic and titillating and whatever, and everybody was like ashamed and scared to talk about it. And that was right here in this room, maybe 5, 6 years ago. 6 or 7, I don't know, but so I think there's still a lot of work to be done around sexual minority, around people being able to explore their identities in all different sort of ways, because that's how I think about S&M. And I think even we as social workers have a lot to grow in that work.
So certainly there's a lot of work to be done, but thank you all for the work that you do. And thank you so much for coming today and speaking with us.
Thank you. Great.